It's a Tuesday night. Your phone buzzes twice. The first text is from your mother. She needs a ride to her cardiologist appointment on Thursday. The second is from your 26-year-old who just moved back home and wants to know if you can co-sign a lease. Your boss sent 3 emails after 6. Your knee hurts. And somewhere between microwaving dinner and paying a credit card bill, you realize something. Nobody is coming to save you. And the weird part is, you've known that since you were 9 years old, sitting in an empty house with a key around your neck, making yourself a sandwich after school. Welcome to being Generation X. And today, we're breaking down the psychology of the most overlooked generation in American history. Born between 1965 and 1980, raised on benign neglect, shaped by economic whiplash, and now quietly holding everything together while 2 louder generations get all the attention. Here's the thing. You're not invisible because you don't matter. You're invisible because you were trained to never ask for help. And that training is now the very thing making your life harder than it needs to be. But there's something deeper going on here, something that explains why this generation specifically ended up caught between 2 completely different versions of America. And once you understand it, everything clicks. Let's start with where it all began. Generation X grew up during one of the most turbulent periods in American family life. Divorce rates nearly doubled between 1960 and 1980. Roughly 40% of Gen X kids experienced their parents' divorce firsthand. Dr. Rachel Morrison's longitudinal research on children of divorce found that these early experiences created specific attachment patterns, a deep-seated self-reliance wired into the nervous system before kids even understood what was happening. When you're 8 years old and the adults around you are falling apart, you learn one lesson fast. The only person you can count on is yourself. That's not a philosophy. That's survival coding. And it didn't stop at home. Gen X became the original latchkey generation. Millions of kids coming home to empty houses because both parents were working or because single-parent households had become the norm. No after-school programs, no helicopter parenting, no cell phones to check in. Just a house key, a television, and the understanding that you figured things out on your own. Psychologist Jeffrey Arnett, who literally wrote the book on emerging adulthood, identified that the concept of delayed adulthood, this extended transition from teenager to fully independent adult, actually began taking shape with this generation. Not because they were lazy, because the economic ground was already shifting beneath their feet before they even entered the workforce. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Gen X graduated into the corporate restructuring era of the late 1980s and early 1990s. Their parents had pensions, their parents had company loyalty that went both directions. Gen X walked into a world where corporations had already started treating employees as expendable line items. Job security didn't just weaken, it evaporated. And instead of protesting or organizing, Gen X did what they'd always been trained to do. They adapted, quietly, without complaint. They became the first generation to widely depend on 401k retirement plans, essentially being told, here's the stock market, good luck, your entire retirement depends on how well you play a game nobody taught you. Unlike boomers who had defined benefit pensions, Gen X became amateur investors with everything on the line. And that distinction matters enormously when we talk about what happened next. The dot-com bubble hit between 2000 and 2002. Many Gen Xers were in their late 20s and 30s, finally starting to accumulate real wealth for the first time. Startup stock options, tech investments, the promise of a new digital economy. And then it collapsed. First real wealth accumulation, gone. But they picked themselves up, because that's what they do. They dusted off, recalibrated, started rebuilding, and then 2008 happened. Let that sink in for a second. The Great Recession hit Gen X when they were between 28 and 43 years old. Peak earning years. Peak home buying years. Peak family building years. Peak family building years. Home equity destroyed. Retirement accounts gutted. And here's the critical detail that separates Gen X from younger generations who also suffered. Recovery time. When you lose 40% of your retirement savings at 35, mathematically you can rebuild. When you lose it at 43, the math gets brutal. The Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances from 2022 paints a stark picture. Gen X wealth trajectories never fully recovered to where projections said they should be. They're carrying an average of $42,000 in household debt, and the clock is ticking in a way it isn't for younger cohorts. But there's more going on than just economics. Let's talk about what this did psychologically, because the money part is only half the story. Dr. Michael Chen's research on what he calls adaptive cynicism reveals something fascinating. Gen X didn't become cynical because they're negative people. They developed skepticism as a survival mechanism. When you watch institutions fail repeatedly, when you see companies betray loyalty, When you live through multiple economic collapses, your brain recalibrates. It starts treating optimism as a threat. Cynicism becomes armor. And here's what's wild. It actually works. Defensive pessimism, as psychologists call it, allows people to prepare for worst-case scenarios while still functioning. Gen X didn't just develop this trait randomly. Their brains built it in response to lived experience. That's not a character flaw. That's neurological adaptation. Sound familiar? If you're Gen X and you've ever been called jaded, or told to lighten up, or accused of being too negative, understand something. Your brain was doing exactly what it needed to do to protect you. The problem is that the same armor that got you through your 20s and 30s becomes heavier in your 50s. And now we arrive at what researchers call the sandwich generation phenomenon. Pew Research Center data from 2013 identified this pattern, but it's only intensified since then. Gen X is simultaneously caring for aging parents and supporting adult children who can't achieve financial independence. Dr. Sarah Thompson's studies on intergenerational financial stress patterns found that sandwich generation adults experience measurably elevated cortisol levels. That's the stress hormone, not slightly elevated, chronically elevated. The kind that damages cardiovascular health, disrupts sleep, and accelerates cognitive decline. And here's the part that makes Gen X's version of this especially brutal. They were raised to handle it alone. Unlike Millennials, who grew up in the age of therapy normalization and mental health awareness, Gen X came of age when seeking help was stigmatized. Researcher Patricia Williams calls this silent crisis syndrome. Gen X doesn't vocalize their struggles. They internalize them. They compress. They keep going. Dr. James Patterson's research through the National Institute of Mental Health found that Gen X has the highest rates of undiagnosed burnout of any living generation. Not because their burnout is worse necessarily, but because they never learned to identify it, name it, or ask for support. They pioneered hustle culture not as a trendy hashtag, but as a necessity. There was no safety net. There was no going viral about your mental health. There was just work harder, figure it out, don't complain. And here's something that often gets overlooked. Gen X also bridged two entirely different technological worlds. They grew up analog, rotary phones, card catalogs, handwritten directions. Then they had to adapt to digital technology mid-career, learning systems that younger workers absorbed intuitively. They're simultaneously too young to have benefited from boomer-era economic conditions, the pensions, the affordable housing, the single-income households, and too old to have the digital native fluency that gives younger workers advantages in today's economy. They exist in this strange middle space, fluent in both worlds, but native to neither. Now, when you put all of this together, you start to see a pattern. And it's not a pattern of failure. It's a pattern of systemic displacement. Generation X didn't fall behind because they made bad choices. They were caught between two economic paradigms. The old model, where loyalty and steady work led to security, collapsed right as they entered it. The new model, where digital fluency and entrepreneurial disruption create wealth, crystallized right as they were aging out of peak adaptability. They had the psychological toolkit from the first era, self-reliance, stoicism, heads-down work ethic, but those tools were designed for a world that no longer existed. And the tools of the new era, vulnerability, networking, personal branding, digital leverage, were never part of their programming. This isn't about individual failure. This is about institutional evolution outpacing human adaptation. And that's a cautionary tale that extends far beyond one generation. Because this pattern can repeat, any cohort caught in the gap between how the world was and how the world became faces the same invisible squeeze. The rules change, but nobody sends a memo. And the people stuck in the transition pay the highest price while making the least noise. Gen X is now entering their mid-40s to late 50s. Some are pushing into their early 60s. They're facing a potential retirement crisis with insufficient savings, no pensions, aging parents who need increasing care, and adult children who can't yet stand fully on their own. Harvard Medical School's 2023 research on hidden mental health crises in middle-aged adults found that this demographic is under extraordinary psychological pressure with almost no cultural framework for addressing it. So, if you're Generation X, if you're the one holding everything together while feeling like nobody sees you doing it, hear this clearly. You're not broken. You're not cold. You're not jaded. You're compressed. You're carrying the weight of two generations on shoulders that were built strong precisely because nobody carried you. That self-reliance you learned at 9 years old with a key around your neck, it kept you alive. It got you here. But it doesn't have to be the only tool in your kit anymore. You're not the forgotten middle child because you don't matter. You're forgotten because you never learned to scream. And that silence, that quiet competence, that refusal to fall apart, it isn't weakness. It's the most underestimated form of strength in America right now. If you're Gen X, tell me in the comments, which part of this hit closest to home? Was it the Latchkey Kid part? The sandwich generation part? The silent burnout? Let's find each other. Because you spent long enough thinking you're the only one holding it all together in the dark. Subscribe if you want more psychology breakdowns like this. And the next time someone skips right from boomers to millennials, send them this video. It's time they see what they've been missing.